Welcome to NiceTalk, the crypto show by NiceHash, where we feature expert commentary from around the industry. And my name is Joe. I'm Chief Marketing Officer at NiceHash. Joining me is Marko, our mining hardware manager. And we're very happy to welcome today our special guest, Daniel Keller, who is co-founder at Flux. So at NiceHash, we recently added Zelhash to the platform. So we're looking forward to dive into it deeper with you. And can we start off just by telling us a bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, first off, thanks, Joe and Marko, for having me on today. I really do appreciate it. NiceHash has been around for a very long time and has supported the mining community in many different ways. And I'm super appreciative to you guys taking the time to talk with me today. So I am the co-founder and CSO for Zelcore and for Flux. So Flux is a decentralized computational network. Essentially, we were Web3 before Web3 was cool. We built a very broad platform with Flux OS and other products that continue to kind of keep bolstering the ability for people to deploy on the platform. We started out with a couple hundred nodes and we're well over 2,800 now. And we're getting ready to go through our node halving within the next month or so. So I think, our rough estimates are between 10,000 plus nodes that'll be deployed all across the network. And of course, our GPU side of the house with all our awesome miners. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about all of it.
Awesome, cool. I had no idea it had so many nodes. That's awesome. Can you describe a little bit for a newcomer, like what is Flux? Someone who's never heard of it, how would you describe that?
Well, so the 10,000 foot view is this. If somebody asks you what's Flux, the easiest response is we are the AWS of blockchain. So essentially blockchain as a service. So we allow and enable decentralized projects and even centralized projects to deploy in a decentralized manner. So you can run dApps, you can run oracles, you can run websites, you can run anything that you can place in a Dockerized container, you can deploy on the Flux network. So our goal was to replace or augment what AWS was doing. Currently, the conventional model is if you're a business and you need infrastructure, you go to AWS. AWS deploys this to colo locations wherever your region is. You might get one or two, but it's fairly centralized. We go peer-to-peer. So essentially what Flux does is it relies on the node operators to provide enterprise-based infrastructure to us that we then provide out to other people in terms of deployment. So one of the cool kickers is I tell people this right now is if I want to deploy a pretty high-end server on Amazon Web Service, it's going to cost me about $135 a month for deployment. On Flux, it's $0. So you can come on, you can deploy your dApp, you can deploy your website. We have multiple websites running on there now. We have dApps, we have nodes, so we support, Kusama, Polkadot, KDA, Firo, Presearch. You can deploy all these different nodes right on Flux today. So, and you can do it for free, which is amazing.
How is this possible? How is it possible to somebody must be paying electricity or something? How is that possible?
Yeah, it's essentially the same way you guys conceptually know a lot about mining. It works exactly like mining. So, to mine, you have to put the resources in. So you buy the hardware, you buy the gear, you buy the electricity, you make sure that you're good, and then you get the asset in return. It's the same way with node infrastructure. You deploy the node, you deploy the infrastructure, whether you're doing it on a Jetson or a Raspberry Pi, or you're doing it on legacy-based infrastructure, and you're being incentivized by Flux, the asset. So we're essentially going peer-to-peer with providing that technology.
So basically, if there's a limit of how many nodes you can have, depending on the cost of running a node and compared to the price of the token. Because at some point, the running a node on Flux won't be profitable anymore. So I guess that is the limit of how many resources, how many servers you can host on Flux.
Why would you say that it wouldn't be profitable?
For the owner of the node, because
Yeah.
the amount of Flux token he will get in fiat won't be the same, won't cover the costs.
Well, first of all, you guys are miners, so you know delayed return on investment,
Yeah.
right? So you know that if you have to drop down, $6,000 to $10,000 to build a new rig, I mean, you're lucky if you're getting it that cheap. Then you're understanding your delayed return on investment. There are particular point in times where you will mine at a barely a profit or even at a loss to take a position in a particular asset. So you don't have that issue currently with the nodes, because I think our main node, which is, we have Cumulus, Nimbus, and Stratus. I believe the Stratus is making over $2,000 a month if you're deploying that node. And not only that, is what I didn't mention, and I think this will help you, Marko, a little bit, is you're not only providing computational resources for Flux by transactional validation on the network, you're also providing infrastructure for third parties. So essentially, if you deploy a Flux node, and then on top of that, you deploy a KDA chain web node and also a KDA node, you'll be rewarded in Kadena as well, because you're essentially helping them to incentivize their network to remain decentralized. So conceptually, it works a little bit different than just, mining, and you understand delayed return on investment. You understand that you may be mining at a loss. You have to cover your cost. Whereas a node, you're only limited to the projects that deploy on the network, and then you can increase essentially your holdings in those particular positions by providing those computational resources.
Okay, thanks. How did you get involved with Flux? I mean, where does the idea come from? And can you tell us more?
Well, we started our life as Zcash, which we were a fork of Zcash, essentially. So I think we're the number 4 or number 5 most utilized but Bitcoin fork. I mean, Bitcoin obviously is number 1, and then Litecoin and a couple ahead of that. But we did it a little bit different. So we knew kind of right away that we didn't want to be a carbon copy of another project. We wanted to be originators of. We didn't want to be the next Ethereum or the next Zcash. We wanted to be the first Flux. At that point, we went from a kind of a rebranding process. We dropped the cash. We had Zell. Then Zell eventually completely forked and rebranded and became Flux. So, and we did that for a lot of different reasons, because when we deployed the project initially, we understood there was 2 areas that we needed to cover. One was we needed to be able to custody assets in a more seamless way than what was out there. You guys remember mining wallets. I mean, you guys remember, setting up these full nodes. They were a serious pain in the rear end, right? So that gave birth to Zelcore. And Zelcore is a multi-asset platform, 300 plus assets, 58,000 plus tokens in it. It has API integration for exchanges. It has direct fiat on ramps with Wire. So our goal was to create this platform so that people could actually mine and participate in these networks in a more consolidated manner. Now, the cool thing was we realized if we didn't build something to run Flux on top of, or Zelcore on top of, it would just be another Web 2 legacy-based piece, right? So it would have areas of exposure where if we were running on Amazon servers and they decide to come in and they're like, you know what, we don't like crypto anymore, so guess what, your servers are gone. So the initial idea around, how do we take master nodes that really was at that particular, you guys remember the master node craze, right? It was totally gross, but the underlying fundamental infrastructure or the plan of it could have been used. So what we did is we took the good technology pieces of deterministic nodes and we applied that to our layer 2. That's our kind of proof of use work platform, which is our node structure.
Okay, and what is Flux OS? What Flux OS? What's that? I read that on your page, but yeah.
Yep. Flux OS is the operating system that runs on Linux that basically enables all of this to happen. So it's the bread and butter. It's the when you set up a node, you're deploying it on a Linux. It's based on Linux, so it's built on top of Linux. So you have the Linux operating system, and then on top of that, you build the Flux OS. So, and it really acts just like that as a secondary operating system that allows the node users to communicate with their nodes. It allows the network to be able to deploy on the networks. We have Flux Domain Manager that does domain management. We have ZelID, which is our self-sovereign identification for different components for the infrastructure that ties your Zel core to your Flux node. We have that was ZelID, two-factor authentication. We have D2FA, which is decentralized two-factor authentication built on the blockchain. So there's no third party. If you want 2FA, you can deploy that right out of Zel core and have a decentralized two-factor authentication. So it's really a suite of multiple pieces of the platform. It's very holistic. It looks a lot different than probably every other project that you've ever looked at, sans maybe a Solana and or what kind of is happening with ETH. It's an ecosystem, but our ecosystem looks different. We're the guys that we sell the pickaxes and the shovels and the pans and the gold rush, where it's a pure infrastructure play. We're agnostic. We don't pick or choose winners or losers. We bring in the best technology and we place it on our platform.
Okay, thanks. So I guess
very cool. Sounds very secure.
Yep. It's like it's an iterative process. So we're continuing to keep growing, and we have a very vibrant, like, we call them they're the Flux Army, but boy, they're in your face, man. They love the project, and there's what's not to love. Like when you end up coming and discovering and falling down the rabbit hole that's Flux, you realize very quickly that you're into something special. And I'm not saying that because it's my project, because whether or not I was sitting here talking to you or somebody else was representing Flux, it is a very exciting project. It's the project I work on.
The same thing happened to me when I started investigating Flux. I was just like, oh, they really offer a lot of things, a lot of interesting things. Like when I imagine hosting servers on Flux, that's quite interesting.
Well, the nice thing about, and there's projects that complain about miners. Miners do this thing where they mine and then they just dump it for fiat or they dump it for BTC. You don't see that as much with Flux because the ability is to create this passive income model beyond what the mining is. So most of our miners also run nodes. So it's almost like this symbiotic relationship. If you have a project that can give use case to your utility asset, like Flux does, then those miners don't become, a detriment. They become an absolute essential part of your project. And that's the way we view miners they're mining, providing network resources, critical network resources, but they're also becoming part of the ecosystem by naturally traversing over to stand up nodes and infrastructure. Because if you've set up a rig, you can set up a node. I got a Raspberry Pi running over there with a node, and I don't know squat about this stuff. I always tell them they don't let me crypto, but I'm running these nodes, and it's, is it easy? It's not easy. These nodes aren't like one-click deployment nodes where you think you have a node and, you burn some asset, and there's a lot of Ponzi scheme like projects out there that say they're one-click deployment nodes. No. If it's like being a miner, when you set up that rig for the very first time and you get those cards hashing, that feeling you get at the end, it's like, yes, I did something special. And that's why the people that are running the nodes are often our miners as well, because they understand that delayed return on investment. They understand how to create passive income models, and we're facilitating the miners to be able to do these different things, not only on Flux, but our parallel assets as well.
So yes, it really draws you into the project in many different angles. I was going to ask, how is it different from like internet computer, which is some similar decentralized storage computing facility, but you kind of already explained a little bit about the different layers that Flux has. That maybe you can explain a bit more the difference between.
Yeah. First of all, when you say decentralized, you actually have to be decentralized. ICP uses basically colo data centers that you can't really provide infrastructure to. So, I mean, ICP as a concept was interesting, and it really started to turn people into Web3. It's a shame that it, was a VC funded 90% VC based project that ended up being a terrible retail play, and a lot of people got wrecked. We kind of saw these things coming. We knew that there would be projects that deployed like this. So our goal was to make sure, one, the user didn't spend resources. Your Flux is your Flux. You hold it in your Zelcore and you deploy your node. You'll never, your asset is your asset. There's no weird economic model where we make you burn your coins. There's no weird economic model where we, make you lock it up for God knows 3 years. I mean, what is that? You can start a Flux node now, and 5 minutes from now, take it back down again, and your assets are back in your platform. And that's how we differ from a lot of these projects. We have and I'm not just saying, again, I'm not saying it's because my projects, it's factual. Go do your research, check it out, look at our economic model. We have the best economic model that we place the biggest value in our community. Our miners, our node ops, our individuals that are using our parallel assets, our traders, you name it. We put value in that. So, no VC, we have no VC funds. 96% of the total circulating or total supply will be community based. The founders took literally enough to run like 3 nodes. You know what I mean? And we were required to run those. It was 4 nodes. We were required to run those 4 nodes as we were starting to build the infrastructure. So there was no pre-mines. There was none of that BS. Fair launch. There is a foundation that helps to basically fund the project, which has been very successful. So over the past 4 years, we've been super good stewards of our resources. We've watched our pennies. We've survived the first bear market. Everybody says, aren't you scared that we're going into a bear market? I'm like, no, man, bring it on. I love bear markets because bear markets, bull markets will make you rich, but bear markets will make you wealthy. Because if you're in a position to be able to take a large position in projects you believe in, and then the natural upcycle, if you're doing your research and you're doing your due diligence, you're going to be rewarded in the end. So, long story short is, I think there are other projects that are out there attempting to look decentralized, but they're really just a Web 2 based infrastructure. So my question is, if you want to build it on Web 2 and you want it to be centralized, build it on Web 2. Don't look at Web 3 because Web 3 is a lot of work, right? So everything that's been built on Web 2 needs to be built on Web 3. So, I think people learned a lesson, or at least I would hope they would, with the ICP debacle. And that is, you have to do your due diligence in a project. You have to understand that large VC firms who take, 80 or 90% of a position in a project isn't good, no matter how you slice it. And it's the same way that, we'll get some hate mail for this one. That's why proof of work is so much more superior than proof of stake. Because essentially, proof of stake is just Web 2. We've already used legacy in the past. We know we don't want that. We want something that is Web 3, that is truly decentralized for the people, by the people, and that's exactly what Flux brings to the table.
Cool.
Nice, yeah. That's very refreshing to hear, and I like that. Yeah, proof of stake is, like you said, I think it's very similar to the traditional models.
Yeah, and I mean, you guys have been supporters in the space for a very long time in terms of mining, and you understand fundamentally the underpinnings of why decentralization is so important. And, we're in a weird time because, proof of work is being demonized. You got a lot of projects who, were proof of work projects that are starting to move to proof of stake. In the end, I think when you follow the fads, or you follow what you believe will make the price of your asset go up, you end up losing out. I always tell everybody on the project this, wealth and or your asset increasing in value is a byproduct of a solid project that has a fundamental underpinning and a mission that helps deliver your platform, right? So, none of the folks on the Flux project ever even really talk about price, because it doesn't matter. It's way too early for us to even envision what it'll look like, years from now. most of the individuals understand that this is much more. It's much deeper than any other or project out there, including Ethereum, who I think is making a horrible mistake by basically turning their backs on their miners. But that's great news for Flux, because who's not going to turn their back on miners? Us. So bring it, man. Don't sing it. Bring it. Bring your hash. We want
it. Maybe we should move to mining part. Can you tell us more about parallel mining? What's that all about?
Yeah, so parallel mining is kind of a watershed moment for the project, because one of the things that I started talking about very early on in the space is interchain operability. So I believe the holy grail is when blockchains can work together and you can see the symbiotic relationship between these multiple chains. Miners tend to be tribalistic, right? My bag is the best bag. Or they tend to be, I'm mining for BTC and I'm gonna go ahead and sell it, and that's the end of it. We've created really a structure so that people can participate in different ecosystems in this interchain operability and still be able to come back to their primary chain. So we have Flux, which is the primary chain. And then we have parallel assets that have been deployed on Binance Smart Chain, Ethereum, KDA, Solana, and Tron. Avalanche and Terra Luna is going to be our next add as parallel assets. And we use this as a soft scaling model. So if you're holding Flux, whether it's in a node or in your Zelcore wallet or on, I think there's a couple of exchanges like CoinMetro that support this parallel snapshots, you will get, not only when we do the snapshot, you'll not only get your asset, your primary asset, you'll get the new asset as well. So you would essentially have Flux, and then you would get your parallel asset as well. But it also takes into account all of your other parallel assets. So let's say you're in your primary, you're running 2 nodes. That would be caught in the snapshot. And let's say you're on Binance Smart Chain and you're providing liquidity in a liquidity pool. That would be grabbed in a snapshot. Let's say you're on KDA and you've Catexus deployed and you have assets on the Catex platform. That's included in the snapshot. So what that does is it allows miners to almost, mine and hold with a hedge, knowing that there's going to be a snapshot that'll provide them additional resources. So what we did was we worked with What to Mine to allow it to show whatever the current resources are that you're mining. So you're mining right now. You're mining, most pools will usually do this themselves, where they distribute the parallel assets. But essentially, you're mining plus you're mining your parallel assets at the same time. So people tend to gravitate to wanting to run more infrastructure and run more nodes, because they're going to be rewarded above and beyond what the normal just node reward is or mining reward is. And miners can do the same thing as well on their pools. If you mine to a supported pool, which I believe we have about 6 of them now, you can also get your parallel assets there. And we're getting ready to release the ability for miners to claim their parallel assets without even, running on a pool. So there's lots of really cool opportunities there with parallel assets.
What are those assets? Are those like tokens on the Ethereum chain, or blockchain? Or
yep. So
that's
not a fan of wrapped assets. I think there's too much vulnerabilities there. So what we did was we created a platform called Fusion, which allows you to go from our primary chain to any other parallel chain. So if you have 20,000 Flux on Binance Smart Chain, or you went to Binance, you bought the Binance Smart Chain version of it, and you brought it back down, you can then go through Fusion to take it to the main chain and deploy a node. So,
okay. So
go ahead.
Yeah, this is not a wrapped coin, but it sounds to me it's very similar to wrapped coin.
Not really, because with wrapped coins, you have to rely on third parties to be able to do that. We are actually deploying them natively to the chain. So we're depending on the actual platform and their security model rather than providing a third party to create a wrapped token.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. So we didn't.
So it's a bit different.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to kind of compare it, I mean, Fusion is a bridge. Essentially, it allows you to move from one asset to the other asset. So looks a little different than what everybody's doing, but it really has opened up the door for us, because we picked 10 assets right away. We said these are the 10 assets we want to deploy on, but that could be 1,000 assets. You can continue to keep deploying on multiple chains, and being able to participate in those ecosystems. For instance, for the very first time I moved some Flux over to the Solana chain and started to provide some liquidity in one of the liquidity pools. I did it on Binance Smart Chain as well just to check it out and see how it all worked. And we know it works and works successfully because when Flux deployed on the Binance Smart Chain, we immediately became one of the number one assets on the Binance Smart Chain. So it was kind of like, oh, cool, nice byproduct. We didn't intend it to be, the number one growing asset on Binance Smart Chain, but because we did it that way, it provided a lot of individuals came to the project for the very first time because they participated in the DeFi ecosystem, and now there's a new player in town who really can, they can sink their teeth into, and then they vicariously by discovering the project, then they found out that it's a main chain as well. So now you have folks that found us because of DeFi or fintech or whatever the word you want to use is, and then now all of a sudden they're deploying on the regular infrastructure because they like the project.
So ZilHash is ASIC resistant algorithm. Do you plan to always support GPU miners, or what's behind this decision? Are you mostly for the GPU mines?
So I will tell you right here, right now, to all the miners that are listening, we have every intention of always remaining ASIC resistant, FPGA resistant. GPUs are the only true way to actually have decentralized infrastructure. I can stand up my computer. I have a graphics card in this laptop, and if I decided I wanted to run and mine on my laptop, I would do it. There are a lot of people that will argue that there's still an era of centralization with, farms and stuff like that. Well, go look at an ASIC farm. I walked through guys, have you seen some of these ASIC? I went down to Virginia Beach and was able to walk through the largest Bitcoin mine on the East Coast. At that time, it probably still is. And we're talking football fields in terms of, miners. And I'm standing there looking at this and I'm like, wow. This is centralization. I mean, come on, man.
Yeah.
That doesn't even make sense, So our goal is to always remain ASIC resistant. And a lot of people ask us, they say, well, what happens if you find out there's an FPGA or an ASIC? Then I'm telling you, we will fork immediately. We already have something in place. So if you're a GPU or if you're an ASIC provider or a FPGA provider, don't bother. Because if you do it, you might be able to fly it under the radar for a short period of time. But we will find it and we will fork immediately. We already have that commitment internally. So
that's great. That's also a great vision that you have plans in place for.
Yeah, because I think what we found when we saw the Equihash, the ASICs that were dropped onto Zcash, which I think Zcash made a really piss poor decision with their, not allowing ASICs on the chain, because the argument always is, well, the more hash you have, the safer the chain. And that is just not true. That is not true. It's how your project is built. Flux was built to be ASIC resistant. We've also been put pieces into place so the nodes will help us with our 51% attacks. And we also have policies and procedures to protect the individuals who would be attacked. So, who was the individuals that were necessarily hurt by the 51% attacks? Well, it was the exchanges, right? So the double spends, you have to go where you can spend it. Well, if you can't do that, there's no value to 51% attack it, which means, you can have, and I would always suggest spreading the hash out, but if you have a pool that has a little bit more hash than what you're comfortable with, it's not the end of the world. So instead of taking the time to figure out what those measures are to prevent a 51% attack. I mean, you saw this with Ethereum Classic as well. They chose to go a different way. ETH had the opportunity. They kind of tried to pretend that they were preventing the ASICs from coming on board, but in reality, it didn't matter. They did it anyway. So, Flux is 100% committed to true decentralization, and that means we have to put our money and our time and materials and resources where our talk is, and we'll make sure that we back up our miners.
So what about with the nodes? So you have solid infrastructure for the mining to keep it decentralized. What about with nodes? How does that work if people shut them down, for example? Is the data then spread out to different
So the cool
places?
thing
Or how
about
does it work in
Flux,
terms of
the Flux
redundancy?
OS, and how it load balances is when you deploy to five to 10 different instances, and they're globally spawned. So you have no idea where they're going to spawn at. You could spawn one in China, one in North America, one in Asia, one in Europe, right, and wherever else. If one of those nodes goes offline, it'll immediately spawn another node to replicate the node that went offline. So the ultimate goal is to have this come so redundant, and we'll eventually have geolocation as well, so you can deploy within physical regions, right? So right now it's globally. You're going to have the geolocations that you can deploy regionally, and then you can even get into some deeper pieces with that, with what we're doing with Project Titan. But yeah, I mean, our goal, it's much like mining. You know, Joe, it looks like mining. I mean, you have to make sure that you deploy your servers in different locations. They're deployed all over the world. We have like 40% of them deployed in Germany. Why? Because there's super cheap hosting in Germany. So our goal is to make to work with other platforms, just like we would work with a pool, and we would say, hey, we really want to spread this hash out. You guys have like 40% of the hash. Let's run a promotion on one of the other pools to try to get people to spread the hash. And I think you'll see the same thing with nodes. So the goal is, we lost Germany at one point in time. So we literally lost the entire 40 plus % of the network, and we never went down. So that tells you it's highly redundant. We lost 91% of our network due to a downstream bug from Zcash that took our node network off the line. We lost 91%, and not one of our dApps went down. So, I mean, that's a stress test that I wouldn't recommend anybody doing, and it was a nightmare. But boy, I'll tell you what, when it was all said and done, we were like, wow. Yeah, I was super happy. I mean, you couldn't ask for anything better. I mean, we saw the chain split. We knew what happened within 5 minutes. Within 10 minutes, we had already, got us back on the main chain, and we're working with pools to deploy the updated script to remove the downstream issue. And within an hour, we were back. All of our explorers and pools and everything else was back online. So, if you're not breaking it, it's not technology. So people would say, they would look at that like a negative thing. I don't look at it as a negative thing at all. I tell everybody that participates in the network, yeah, we're going to break this, and I guarantee you're going to have to redo some stuff, and I guarantee you're going to have to work to make these things happen. But the awesome thing is as you're breaking these things, and if you can iterate fast enough, you all of a sudden create a more solid infrastructure for the project.
And you learn on the way.
Yeah.
You mentioned that people are hosting in Germany. So people are basically renting hosting servers in data centers and putting the Flux OS on them.
Yep.
That's how I understand it. But that's opposite to decentralating, because I would assume it would be better for people to host their nodes at home.
So I would say the majority of the infrastructure is bare metal and hosted by the individuals. And as a matter of fact, you can deploy on a Raspberry Pi or a Jetson. You can deploy on home servers. You can, if you choose to run, a rack and stack, we have individuals that, they get their bare metal and then they deploy them to different locations. And there are VPSs, and because we want the end users ultimately to make the decision what's the right fit for them. If you want to save a bunch of money and you really want to make the most out of your node, then you run bare metal. And I would say, let's say, 45% or more is people running, Raspberry Pis or Jetsons or, stripped down computers that, meet benchmarks, or servers or rack or stack and colo locations, you name it. So now I would respectfully disagree. I think part of decentralization is allowing individuals to make their own choice and their own decisions to provide infrastructure. But I will say this, our solid goal is to promote home deployment. And as a matter of fact, one of our partners that we just announced this past week was with Seed. And Seed provides infrastructure, Jetson-based infrastructure for running nodes at home. Looks a little bit like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the helium miners, but essentially it's kind of like a helium miner that you can deploy.
Okay, so what's the hardware required for these nodes? Like, you mentioned Raspberry Pi, but on your website I watched like a couple of node requirement. I mean, I think the minimum one was 8 GB of RAM.
Yeah, so it would have to be the new Pi, not the one with 4 gig. It would have to have 8 gigs of RAM, and the Jetson is the same. There's a couple Jetsons that don't meet benchmark, and those will only run like your base tier. And I want to say that we kind of structured it up that they'll run the second tier, but I know they won't run what I affectionately call the BAMF, the largest node. So, but essentially Seed provides infrastructure that you can buy in these beefed up, because Jetsons are super powerful. People are building data centers with these Jetsons, and we're working on our edge compute and our AI learning piece with the Jetson deployments. Raspberry Pis, same scenario. There's going to be a storage class, so our basics will become our storage class, and you'll be able to provide additional storage and then be incentivized at a higher rate because you've reached, let's say, 250 terabytes and then 500 terabytes and then whatever, so on and so forth. So the criteria for each one of these nodes can be higher. The benchmark does change in the node halving, which starts next month. The requirements go up. So there will be some hardware that probably doesn't meet the criteria. But the cool thing about it is we're deploying a off-chain node structure as well. So you'll have your enterprise infrastructure that runs on the Flux node. So you'll have your, Cumulus, Nimbus, and Stratus. And then there will be one called the Cirrus. The Cirrus provides you a node network that allows companies to deploy software, or let's say a Balena wants to come in and deploy artificial intelligence on on those Jetsons. For 5 Flux, you can stand up this node and you can participate in that network, and you're directly rewarded by the individuals using the network. So, the easiest way I can explain this is right now, if you're sitting in college and you need, access to a lot of compute resource, you could deploy from our marketplace on our Jetson platform your application to hundreds and hundreds of nodes, and you can start, participating in the network.
This is free. This is free again for the
for the users. It costs them 5 Flux to deploy. So that
not like to deploy a node or to
the off-chain is actually going to be a revenue generation model for those individuals. So if I work for Balena or NVIDIA or somebody that needs to deploy on a mass scale, we have thousands of these Jetsons running, I would then pay a certain amount of money that then would be provided to those node operators. So that's one part of the ecosystem. I call it the world's best test net. Because essentially it's like the main network mirrored, but you're basically deploying it and you're not getting chain rewards from that. So nothing has changed with the block rewards. They're not incentivized with the block rewards. They're incentivized with the people that are spending the resources to run the compute out of marketplace. Then you have the enterprise infrastructure, which is our 3-tier node system. And then you'll have what we call Project Titan, which is our Web 2, Web 3 legacy-based infrastructure. So you'll be able to run shared nodes. So say I have 250 Flux and I want to participate with a bunch of other people to stand up a node. You'll be able to do that on chain. So there's no third-party custody of your asset. You basically provide your node key. It goes into a queue. A node gets stood up, and there will be a little bit of a lockup period for that because we can't have the nodes coming offline all at the same time. So there'll be a little lockup period for that, 3 months or something like that. And then once the 3 months has expired, the node expires and everybody gets their funds back plus what they've earned by providing the infrastructure.
So the minimum, let's say, collateral to build up a node is what amount? 5 Flux?
So you have, the off-chain solution is 5 Flux. And then for the on-chain solution, currently it's 10,000 Flux for the basic, 25,000 for the super, and then for the big boy, it's 100,000. After that,
how much is one Flux worth?
$1.37. So they're not cheap. But here's the thing you have to look at. The halving comes, that criteria changes. The basics become 1,000 Flux, the supers become 12,500 Flux, and the big boys become 40,000 Flux. So they're much more reasonable, much more affordable. It'll bring a lot more infrastructure, and we can continue to kind of keep scaling. So that halving is what we call hard scaling. So you have the soft scaling, which is the parallel assets and their distribution, and then you have the hard scaling, which is the actual halving, much like a Bitcoin halving that you guys are very familiar with.
Mm-hmm. So that's the 3 tiers you're talking about. That's
Stratus,
Cumulus,
yes.
Nimbus, and Stratus. Is that right?
Yeah, and if you go to the website, runonflux.io, you can scroll down about halfway and you can see the requirements, and then you'll also be able to see the new requirements. And if you want to test your gear out, we have a fully functional testnet as well. So, you come in, you request your testnet coins, you deploy your infrastructure, make sure it meets all the criteria, and then you can make the commitment to move over and buy mainnet and go that route. I highly suggest anybody that's thinking about deploying to do it on the testnet, because then you can mess it up as many times as you want and not have to worry about a darn thing. And plus, too, you'd be able to let's say somebody's sitting on the on the fence of whether or not they want to run, a Nimbus or whether or not they want to run a Cumulus. It'll allow them to test both platforms and say, yeah, it just makes sense for me to run a Nimbus. And that's what I'm going to run. So, highly recommend people checking out the testnet.
So do node operators lose collateral by any? Can I, if I set up a node and I run out of power, can I lose that?
No.
Or
you have to meet the benchmarks and the criteria. It's just like mining, right? So you have to make sure that you're ready and available when it's your turn. So if you don't meet the criteria or the benchmarks, you become a toaster, is what we call it. So essentially, you'll get a little error back saying, hey, something happened with your benchmarks and you're out of queue now. So then you have to go back in and figure out what caused that to be out of queue and why you became a toaster, and then you'll move to back in queue again and you'll run. So yeah, it's a lot of work running nodes. We call them decentralized systems administrators because they're building business models on top of what they're doing. So these folks that are running nodes, it's a business for them. That's the way they look at it. It's a lot of work.
So let's take an example then. So for example, you wanted to set up a Minecraft server on Flux. How could you do that? And where would the data be stored? You mentioned you have 5 each instance. You spin up 5.
Yep. So we recently deployed Minecraft Bedrock servers, and we had a Minecraft competition where people could go in and build on Flux their own little Flux world. We had the winner was super creative with how, it was an entire world based around Flux. It really blew my mind. They spent a lot of time on it. But essentially what that does is deploys on multiple servers and gives you redundancy. We're working on our perpetual storage model right now. So the integration of IPFS and other constant data set is as our next push. And that'll also bring in, the ability to launch databases that interlock between nodes so that it gives you more level of redundancy. So our goal is if Airbnb wanted to deploy on Flux, they could do that in a very redundant manner. Our goal is also to allow them to remain in Web 2 while they're working on migrating to Web 3. So I'm not a tribalistic guy. I believe Web 2 doesn't go away, but I believe Web 3 will work in tandem with Web 2 as people move from Web 2 to start to get comfortable with Web 3. So you could see an Airbnb where part of their infrastructure is run on legacy-based infrastructure, Web 2, and part of it's ran on a decentralized model. Or, even better yet, and sorry, Airbnb, I'll say it, somebody creates a new Airbnb on Web 3 that's which is an autonomous network. And the individuals participating in Airbnb would be the ones that are voting for the business model. So it gives you really a true decentralized autonomous organization, because it's not a decentralized autonomous organization that runs on legacy-based infrastructure. It's decentralized autonomous, and it's running on decentralized infrastructure. So that's a big deal.
Before you mentioned queues, so if there's not enough, let's say, storage or computational power, how are users spread out? So if I want to set up a Minecraft server and I'm put in a queue,
no,
is that correct? And once enough storage is freed up,
nope.
then I'm in.
No, we have enough. No? We have enough horsepower right now to run. I mean, 2,800 nodes. I couldn't even. I can tell you the if I pull it up here, the exact amount of resources on the network.
So it's rather the other way around. If you set up a node, you're waiting for someone to.
No, you just if you're setting up a node. Okay, so what you're talking about two different things. You're talking about deploying a node and being a decentralized systems administrator, or deploying a DApp or a website or something like this. This you are you're working as the backbone of Flux, and you're providing the computational resources. This guy is coming in and he wants to deploy a Minecraft server. So he goes to deploy now, and he goes through the process, and he basically deploys on this infrastructure that's supported by the node ops. So these are two different people.
Yeah, I understand that. But what if there's not enough, let's say, there's not enough people who want to set up the apps?
Well, I mean, developers are everything. So we have to have, ongoing developers, and we're seeing them come in mass. So that'll continue to keep growing. So right now we have about 13,903 total cores, about 43 terabytes of RAM, 967 terabytes of hard drive space, and our total hard drives deployed is about 139 terabytes as well. So, I mean, good luck deploying anything that's going to tax this network. I mean, we're running 4,800 plus instances of, pre-search nodes, Firo nodes, KDA nodes. I mean, KDA runs 1,000 nodes alone themselves to help them bolster their decentralized network. So there's no wait period. Like, you literally can go in and deploy your app. There is, as we move through our first iteration, there is kind of like a whitelisting process where you have to have your Docker image, whitelisted. That'll eventually go away, and then people will just immediately be able to go in and deploy to the decentralized network as long as they meet the criteria provided by the XDAO. So the XDAO is really the governance model of the whole project. So the community, it is for the people, by the people. They're the folks that are pulling the shots, and we're just developing the top end infrastructure for what they're supporting.
So let's talk a bit about the future. You mentioned you have sort of different phases that you expect, like with the whitelisting going away. What are sort of the key next steps?
So we want to see, Flux will probably, for all intents and purposes, Flux will be, with this happening, the largest decentralized. We're the largest decentralized compute network now, but we're going to solidify ourselves as the player in the space for Web3. If you're really building, whether you're using the metaverse, which I think is just a buzzword, but essentially, yeah, we all know that it's going to be, big. If you're deploying, dApps for NFTs, if you're, standing up a decentralized application that you want to run, Flux will just naturally be the go-to. Because we're agnostic, you could see other platforms that are doing, other things that we're going to work with that will deploy things on the network that make sense. So what does that look like? Well, we're not a privacy-based coin. We remove the privacy aspect, but there are projects that do privacy much better than us, and you're going to see their technologies deployed on our infrastructure. So we are literally the glue that's going to bind this Web3 thing together. And we never wanted to be, it's not sexy. It's not the, blazing a new trail of DeFi. It is the support model behind it that's going to make all of that possible.
It's the backbone.
Backbone. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Pirate Bay and their issue. Basically, they get shut down continuously because the authorities keep shutting them down. What if they were to host their website on Flux? Would authorities be able to shut the website down?
No,
the servers?
They could not. They could not.
They could not.
I mean, I think there's going to be a very finite terms of service for using Flux. I mean, I think everybody could agree that there's certain content that shouldn't be allowed on any network ever in the history of ever. And it's just a moral piece. And I would never associate myself with a project that would allow that to transpire. But I do believe we don't pick or choose winners. And if the government has an issue with that particular platform, they need to deal with that platform. They don't need to deal with their infrastructure that runs it. So, we look at ourselves as like what an ISP would be. You can't hold ISPs liable for the traffic that passes through their network. You just can't. It's impossible. Flux.
But what if, let's say, some authorities come to you and say, there's a website, we don't want it up there. Can you shut it down? Basically, not if you will, but if you can.
I would tell them that we could not. I mean, they're going to have to do a better job on their side to track down who this individual is and do their work. So, we're not a pinch point. I mean, we're much like, it's out of our hands. Like, where do you send that subpoena?
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? So they're going to have governments and individuals are going to have to work and figure out a process so that they can provide infrastructure. Now, if authorities came to us and say, hey, we have a particular server that is hosting, certain types of pornography or whatever like that. Could we point out that server? Yes, we can. And it would go against the community's terms of services. So we would just blacklist that server and then that would be gone. So, but we would only do it for that particular case. And it's only done because the XDAO has approved it as because that's the biggest thing. Node operators want to know they're protected, and, I'm a cypherpunk by heart, but I also know too that there are things out there that, you just can't have floating around, and it's just I wouldn't be associated with a project that did. So but the long story short is Pirate Bay, if you're looking to run on Flux. Yeah, and I mean, good luck with that. I mean, where the hell do you send it? I mean, if somebody had, this comment came up about Bitcoin, many years ago when they said about, in the signature that you could put, whatever, and they're like, what do you do if somebody puts something on the blockchain and it's not fit? How do you take it down? You don't. I mean, it's a byproduct, and it's a huge positive because decentralization allows you to not deplatform individuals, but give them the opportunity. And by the way, if you're breaking the law, they're going to get you no matter what you do, right? They're going to find you, and you're gonna have to pay for that. But the infrastructure isn't going to pick and choose whether or not you're doing that. So if Joe Rogan is running on Flux, we don't give a shit what he says. It's free speech, right? If we live in a really weird time where we had a sitting president of the United States deplatformed from Twitter because it didn't align with what their political views were. We're literally watching Canada begin to censor individuals and go after their bank accounts because they have opposing views to, you have constructive opposing views to what the mainstream is. So there has to be a better way. There has to be an option, and there is, and that's Flux.
Yep. So where do you see that sort of evolve with Web3? There's lots of kind of challenges that it can have. Take, for example, things like data storage. In some jurisdictions, even like in the European Union, we have like GDPR and things like that. How do you see Web3 evolving with this? Because obviously there's going to be some.
Yeah, I think there will be
conflict there at
conflict,
some
but I
point.
think it's like everything else. I mean, the governments and the individuals who have power are often late to move in any new disruptive technology. I say Flux came to disrupt the disruptors. We showed up, blockchain technology as a whole of the whole premise of it was to have this decentralized, nobody can control it. It's for the people by the people. And then all you saw was legacy Web 2 projects come in and build on top of that, even to the point where they want to change the protocols from proof of work to proof of stake. Well, proof of stake is just legacy based infrastructure. So, the disruptors came in, which was blockchain as a whole, and said, we're going to disrupt the financial space and everything else. And then they started to migrate toward being just like the financial space that they're trying to change. And then in comes Flux that says, nope, 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 this isn't how it is. One of the mottos of Google for many years was don't be evil. And one of the mottos for Flux is don't be evil again. Because we believe that stakeholders and shareholders and VC businesses are the ones that are controlling ultimately what comes to you and what you discern and what you disseminate as information, and you're very limited to what they allow. Flux changes that whole paradigm. It flips it up on its head. Even projects like electronic medical records, to be able to hold your EMR on the blockchain, that's a big deal. Why do I want Google analyzing my health records? I want it somewhere where I can have it and it's portable for me. And with my phone, I can walk into a hospital, provide them a QR code, and allow them to access my EMR. That's what Flux can do. So, there's a lot of different areas, supply chain management, even voting in a decentralized manner. Our XDAO works well. We don't need to know who the individuals are that are voting. We just know that they're producing network resources that allow them to vote. There's a way to do that in a more decentralized manner than what we do today, when our elections are kind of ran by, well, if you're in the States, one would argue, it's rough at best. I'll put it to you that way. Flux changes that because there's no third party that is in the middle. It's a peer-to-peer based system. So I would love to see it. I think you're starting to see people gravitate toward Web3. Andrew Yang, who recently came out, he was a presidential candidate in the States, started Web3 based project, which is really kind of interesting. You're seeing, Jack Dorsey, you're seeing, different people, Elon Musk talking about Web3. Where is Web3? He doesn't understand Web3, but he will. Because it's going to be very difficult to ignore us. And right around the July timeframe, or whenever ETH finally moves to proof of stake, all those folks sitting with graphics cards hashing, and all those folks that are going to need to research a new project, they're going to find us, and we're going to be waiting.
Where do you see Web3 and Flux in 5 years?
Well, I'm a firm believer that this doesn't change overnight. If you go back, I was part of the original, OGs that moved from bare metal to cloud. And I remember sitting in board meetings trying to tell people, like, look, we need to move our infrastructure to the cloud. Well, what's the cloud? Where's the cloud? I don't even understand the cloud. Okay. So it took 10 years, the better part of 10 years, and we still have holdout individuals, the laggards, that aren't necessarily moved to cloud infrastructure. The cloud is real. It is a place. It is a colo location. It is redundant. It is static. So that's Web 2. So what I see are early adopters who understand that this is going to impact their business model, start to research how they can have symbiotic relationships with Web3. So I think the natural transition was bare metal to cloud, from cloud to Web3. And then I think there still is a span between all three of those. And we're going to go after large institutions that are looking to expand. I mentioned Airbnb, but, imagine if, if you had Uber on running on Flux as an autonomous network. So we bring lots of use cases. Here's the kick-ass part, right? This is the part that gets me excited. If you were a major juggernaut in Web 2, the Twitters, the Facebooks, or Meta, whatever they call it now, and you have built this Web 2 legacy-based infrastructure, that means nothing in the Web 3 world. You are nothing in the Web 3 world. The Web 3 world is completely different. So you're already starting to see major players hiring Web3 individuals that understand that this is the natural transition. And if they're not first movers, they're going to miss out. Look, Netscape Navigator was like the go-to search engine. You know, it was like everybody used it. It was on every computer. It was everywhere. And along comes Google, right? And disrupts them and says, you know, there is the algorithms are better. The deployment's better. The look is better. It's cleaner. People adopted it quicker. And Netscape Navigator doesn't even exist today. So their world, which they controlled in Web 1, which was read, when we became Web 2, which is read write, they were no longer valid. And now we're moving to Web 3, where it's read, write, and own. So these folks who built Web 2 infrastructure, if they're not wise and they don't start looking at how they can deploy on Web 3, it's going to, they will cease to exist as a business model. They will be the Netscape, AOL, you know, you name it. You can go on and on. So over the next 5 years, I think you'll see those folks start to launch like these, you know, relationships with Web3. I mean, I can tell you right now, we're working with many large companies who want to understand, you know, how Web3 works and why it's going to benefit them. So I said in a meeting the other day for 2 hours, I was the only one that wasn't wearing a suit and tie. And at the beginning of the meeting, they kind of like scoffed. And I was like almost like this weirdo in his basement that, you know, is like this cypherpunk guy that, you know, he wants to just burn down the world. And they almost scoffed at me at the beginning. But at the end of the 2-hour period, they asked to work with us. So, you know, people, when you present them with the real use case, and it's going to disrupt their business model, they get a little terrified. And that's man, those are the moments I relish. I love that. I love seeing the look on their face when the light goes off and you're like, holy shit.
Yeah, exactly. It's very hard to understand Web3 if you don't have like use cases, because most people just talk Web3, and you don't quite understand what's that all about if someone doesn't explain it to you in the 85 way. Explain me like I'm 5.
Well, I think a lot of it is the term Web3 is kind of they use it as a buzzword, but the fundamental underpinnings of what it is just decentralized compute. That's all it is. You know, so, you know, we embrace the Web3 because it's easier. Folks that were in Web 2 or in any really business model, okay, and you started talking to them about crypto or blockchain. Nope, that's a scam. It's, you know, it's bad. It's this. It's, you know, only people use it for illegal stuff. Yada yada yada. But crypto, no blockchain. When you explain them what Web 3 is, it looks like Web 2. And people that were resistant to moving into crypto and blockchain because of the connotation that it had will move to Web 3 because it looks like what they already know. So, you know, you can easily explain that between those two things. And they don't care about the fundamental technology underneath of it. They just want to be able to understand, here's Web 2, here's Web 3.
I wonder if Satoshi.
It's exactly like Wi-Fi. Like you have that magic moment when you don't need to know what's going on behind. It just works.
I wonder if Satoshi understood what will the blockchain bring, if he saw that far.
Well, if you go back and look at some of his posts on his blog specifically, and there's a couple of emails, I believe it was to, I can't remember who it was to, but anyway, the crux of it is he understood that proof of work would iterate. Now his vision, I don't know that he could have. He did talk about consensus. He did talk about if somebody in the project didn't agree with the direction of the project, they could create, a fork from the project and they can run their own project. I don't know if conceptually he envisioned looking at what we are today in terms of all these altcoins that are out there. And I think he would be pretty upset with some of the projects like the meme coins and really just the shit coin out there. But the thing about it is he acknowledged multiple times that these nodes and this mining infrastructure would would kind of almost come under attack because of the use of resources. So it was a necessary evil for decentralization, but kind of the holy grail for that is to create a proof of use of work, which is exactly what Flux has been building on for the past 4 years. So I'm not saying we're fixing Satoshi Nakamoto's problem. I think the problem's a real one, and we got to continue to, as a community. And I'm not talking the Flux community. I'm talking as the blockchain community. Look at solutions to provide better solutions to how we provide these comp resources. ASICs are not going to do it. GPUs are going to do it because I can use GPUs to render. I can use GPUs for folding. I can use GPUs, real proof of use of work. So, yeah, I mean, I think Web3 is really going to, it's gaining its attention now to the very early, if we're on the adoption curve, right? Here's the adoption curve. We're down here, way before early adopters. We're like literally at the beginning of a baseball game. You know, we're not even in the first inning yet. We're in the dugouts. So I think over the next 5 years, I think you're going to see that adoption curve. And like Joe mentioned about Wi-Fi, you know, I remember the first time I turned on my very first Wi-Fi router, and I was like, it's pretty cool. You know what I mean? Did I understand the fundamental underpinnings of how it worked? Nope, didn't care. It was nice. Now I could sit in my living room with my laptop. So, you know, it all worked out in the end. But I think that's what, you know, I think that's what sets Web3 apart a little bit, because you really have two demographics. You have retail, the individuals who are going to use it and deploy on it. And then you have the institutional folks who are going to want to figure out how to migrate into a specific part of Web3.
Yeah. I look forward to.
Oh man, that's one of
that's social media on Web3.
Somebody asked me the other day. They said, "What, you know, if you could pick one thing to deploy on Flux today, what would it be?" And I was like, "I want Twitter on Flux, but I don't want it to be Twitter. You know, I want it to be it's the very first guy." So if you're a developer and you're out there listening right now, and you have, you know, the knowledge to build a application like that and be able to Dockerize and deploy it. We offered 100,000 Flux, which is about almost $250,000, for that person to come in and deploy that infrastructure. So that's out there, guys. And if you come in and you can make it work, you can get the first mover advantage, and you can make a nice chunk of change doing it as well.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to see that. So yeah, that's been really great to hear from you and for everything about Flux. We just recently listed ZelHash on the NiceHash, so anyone who's interested to get involved with it can get involved with it on NiceHash as well. But of course, you can go and check out Run on Flux and explore all the interesting aspects of it. Check out their testnet and make sure you follow NiceHash.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. I really do appreciate it.
And we'll see you all soon in the next episode.
For joining.